Forget about natural selection in the wild. Forget predators and plagues. Turns out, the most efficient killer on the planet is just a bad idea. And sometimes, that idea comes from your own brain. This isn't just a list, it's a front row seat to the moments where common sense packed its bags and physics sent the final invoice. The stories you're about to hear involve real people, real choices, and real permanent consequences. This video serves as a stark, often darkly humorous reminder of what not to do. Do not try any of this at home, or anywhere, ever. 1. The prank that ended with the worst punchline imaginable is a story that serves as a brutal masterclass in the laws of unintended consequences. We're in South Carolina, at the tail end of a long night of drinking and questionable decision-making. Our protagonist is that guy in every friend group. The class clown, the life of the party, the one whose entire personality is built on getting a laugh, no matter the cost. His target for the evening was his good friend, a guy who was probably just trying to say his goodbyes and go home. As they all spilled out of the bar into the dimly lit parking lot, our prankster saw his opportunity for one last grand finale. He decided it would be absolutely hilarious to pants his friend, the timeless, juvenile act of yanking someone's trousers down in public. It's a prank built on surprise and mild humiliation, meant to get a quick, cheap laugh from the assembled crowd. He snuck up behind his unsuspecting friend, and with the timing of a seasoned comedian, he hooked his fingers into the waistband of his buddy's jeans and yanked down with all his might. For a split second, the prank worked perfectly. The friend was caught completely off guard, his pants suddenly around his ankles, a look of pure, bewildered shock on his face. The group erupted in the kind of roaring, wheezing laughter that only comes from cheap beer and low standards. But in that exact moment of triumphant hilarity, a chain reaction of pure, chaotic physics was set in motion. The victim of the prank, startled and suddenly unable to use his legs properly, lost his balance. He didn't just stumble forward, he instinctively lurched backward, trying to regain his footing. He took 1, 2 clumsy, staggering steps back, away from the parking lot and directly into the street. It was a street that ran alongside the bar, and at that very moment, a car was pulling out, its driver probably just focused on getting home safely. The driver wasn't speeding or being reckless. They were just leaving a bar at closing time. They would never have expected a human being to suddenly materialize, falling backward into their path. The driver hit the brakes, but it was far too late. The sound of screeching tires cut through the laughter, replacing it with a sudden, horrifying silence. The prankster stood there, frozen, probably still holding a piece of his friend's belt loop, the architect of a catastrophe he could never have imagined. The joke had landed, but the punchline was a tragedy that no one was laughing at. It's a chilling reminder that the line between a harmless prank and an irreversible disaster can be as thin as a pair of blue jeans. 2. A modern classic from the "Don't try this at home, you absolute moron" collection is the tale of a man who decided to bring a viral video stunt into the real world with predictably messy results. Our hero is a 28-year-old from Tennessee, a guy who probably spent a little too much time watching epic fail compilations and thinking, "I could do that, but better." His chosen form of extreme sport? Shopping cart surfing. The plan, which he and his friend concocted, was as simple as it was idiotic. One guy drives an SUV, while the other rides in a shopping cart being towed behind by a rope. It's the kind of stunt that looks hilarious for about 10 seconds on the internet before someone usually ends up with a broken collarbone. But they weren't content with just doing this in an empty parking lot. That was for amateurs. They were going to take their show on the road, on a busy public street, to really feel the thrill. So they borrowed a heavy-duty shopping cart, tied a thick rope to the back of their beat-up SUV, and our hero hopped in, ready for the ride of his life. At first, it was probably exhilarating. They started slow, the shopping cart rattling pleasantly on the asphalt. Then they picked up speed. 20 miles per hour. 30. The wind was screaming in his ears. The world was a blur, and he was the king of the road, a suburban chariot racer powered by a V6 engine, and pure, uncut foolishness. He was probably whooping and hollering, feeling utterly invincible. But the thing about shopping carts is that they are designed to do one thing: wobble uncontrollably around a grocery store at 3 miles per hour. They are not designed for high-speed maneuvering on a busy street. As they were cruising along, the driver of the SUV suddenly had to swerve. Maybe it was a pothole. Maybe it was a squirrel with a death wish. It doesn't matter. The driver reacted instinctively, yanking the wheel to avoid the obstacle. The SUV, with its power steering and modern suspension, handled the swerve just fine. The shopping cart, however, did not get the memo. With its tiny, rigid wheels and non-existent steering, it continued straight ahead, governed by the simple, unforgiving law of inertia. The rope went taut like a guitar string, and then, with the force of a medieval catapult, it whipped the shopping cart sideways, instantly ejecting its sole passenger. He wasn't just thrown to the ground. He was launched, like a human cannonball, directly into the path of oncoming traffic in the opposite lane. A driver in another car, just heading home from work, was suddenly faced with the surreal and impossible sight of a grown man flying through the air towards their windshield. He had wanted to create a viral video, a moment of fleeting internet fame. Instead, he became a very literal and very permanent deadline. 3. The Bet That Was Hard to Swallow is a beautiful, tragic poem about the human ego, a story that asks the timeless question, what is the absolute dumbest thing a man will do to win a bet? Our setting is a classic dive bar in Illinois, the kind of place where the floors are sticky, and the best ideas are born at the bottom of a pitcher of cheap beer. Our hero, a 30-year-old man, found himself in the midst of a heated debate. The topic wasn't politics or sports. It was about his own personal superpower. He claimed, with the unshakable confidence of a man who's had a few too many, that he could swallow a live fish, not a goldfish cracker, not a Swedish fish gummy, a living, breathing, wriggling fish. The bar, naturally, erupted in a chorus of laughter and disbelief. His friends called his bluff, and soon a bet was made. The stakes weren't high, probably just a round of drinks and a few moments of fleeting glory. But for our hero, his honor was on the line. Someone produced the co-star for this tragic play. A 5-inch live fish swimming innocently in a glass of water. It wasn't a huge fish, but it was big enough, and more importantly, slimy and very much alive. This was the moment of truth. A hush fell over the bar as he took the glass. He looked at the fish. The fish, presumably, looked back at him with a sense of deep, existential dread. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and with one heroic, head-back, open-throat gulp, he swallowed the entire contents of the glass. For a split second there was stunned silence, followed by an eruption of cheers. He had done it. He was a legend. He slammed the empty glass on the bar, a triumphant grin on his face. But his victory lap was cut short by a strange, gurgling sensation in his throat. The fish, which he had successfully swallowed, had not gone quietly into that good night. On its way down, it had deployed its last desperate defense mechanism, its sharp, spiny dorsal fin. The fish had gotten stuck, lodged perfectly sideways in his windpipe, its fins acting like tiny, sharp anchors. His triumphant grin turned into a look of wide-eyed panic. He started to claw at his throat, his face turning a shade of purple that clashed horribly with the bar's neon signs. The cheers died down as his friends realized this was not part of the act. Someone called the paramedics. They arrived to a chaotic scene, finding a man gasping for air, unable to speak, pointing frantically at his own throat. They tried the Heimlich maneuver. They tried to dislodge it with forceps. But the fish was wedged in too tightly. It had created a perfect waterproof seal, blocking his airway completely. He had won the bet. He had proven his point. He just wasn't able to stick around to enjoy his free beer. It's a powerful reminder that some bets are best left on the table, especially when your opponent has fins and a very strong will to live. 4. A DIY project that uncoiled with explosive results is a story that should be shown to every new homeowner at their closing. It's a powerful lesson in knowing your limits and in understanding that some things in your house are not your friends. They are patient, coiled monsters waiting for you to make one wrong move. Our hero is a man in Austria, a classic weekend warrior. He was the kind of guy who saw a leaky faucet not as a problem, but as an opportunity to break out his toolbox and save a few bucks. His enemy on this fateful day was his garage door. One of the massive torsion springs, the things that do all the heavy lifting, had broken. A professional would charge a couple $100s to replace it. Our guy looked at that quote, scoffed, and said, "I can do that myself for 20." He went to the hardware store, bought a new spring, and came home, ready to engage in a battle of wits with a simple mechanical object. What he didn't understand is that a garage door spring isn't just a piece of metal. It's a tightly wound instrument of pure, terrifying potential energy. A fully tensioned spring holds enough force to launch a bowling ball across the street. It is, without a doubt, the single most dangerous object in the average home. Unaware of the coiled serpent he was about to poke, he started his repair. He got his wrenches, propped the door open, and began to loosen the bolts on the bracket holding the one remaining good spring. He was probably feeling pretty proud of himself, saving money, being self-reliant. He loosens the first bolt, then the second. Then he gets to the final bolt, the one tiny piece of metal holding back an incredible amount of stored energy. He gives it one last turn. In that instant, the spring was released from its prison. It didn't just unwind, it exploded. With a sound like a gunshot, the spring uncoiled with unimaginable violence. The force was so immense it ripped a piece of the metal bracket clean off and sent it flying across the garage like a piece of shrapnel from a grenade. Our hero, standing directly in its path, never even had time to react. The metal projectile struck him with lethal force, ending his DIY career in a single, brutal moment. He had wanted to save a couple $100s on a repair job. Instead, he paid a price that was infinitely higher. It's a grim reminder that some jobs are best left to the professionals, especially the ones that come with a built-in, high-tension catapult aimed directly at your face. 5. The Closet Brewery and the Carbonated Bomb is a story that serves as a powerful chemistry lesson, a tale of a young man whose thirst for cheap party booze led him to invent a new, highly effective and entirely accidental improvised explosive device. Our protagonist is a college student, and like most college students, he had two primary goals in life: to study occasionally and to party frequently. For his upcoming rager, he needed alcohol, and lots of it. But being a broke student, he decided to bypass the liquor store and embrace his inner bootlegger. He was going to brew his own. His recipe was simple, gleaned from the darkest corners of the internet: yeast, sugar, and water. The holy trinity of cheap hooch. He mixed the ingredients together in a large, heavy-duty plastic container, the kind you might use for storing soup. It had a tight-fitting, screw-on lid, which he thought was perfect for keeping his precious concoction safe and sound. He screwed the lid on extra tight, gave the container a triumphant shake, and then looked for a place to let the magic happen. He needed somewhere warm and dark for the fermentation process to begin. His closet seemed like the perfect spot. He tucked his little science experiment away behind some old sweaters and dirty laundry, and then went about his day, dreaming of the glorious free party he was about to host. What our budding brewmaster didn't understand, or had perhaps slept through in high school chemistry class, is that fermentation is not a quiet, gentle process. It's a vigorous biological reaction where tiny yeast organisms gorge themselves on sugar and, as a byproduct, release a truly massive amount of carbon dioxide gas. And when you put that reaction inside a completely sealed container, you're not making alcohol. You're making a bomb. For days, the pressure inside the plastic container built up, silently, relentlessly. The plastic walls began to bulge. The lid strained against its threads. The closet had become a pressure cooker, a silent ticking time bomb of carbonated fury. And then one evening, while our student was probably sitting in his room studying or playing video games, the container decided it could take no more. It exploded. And this wasn't a gentle pop and a messy spill. The container detonated with the force of a grenade. The heavy-duty plastic, which he thought was so secure, was turned into razor-sharp shrapnel, flying in every direction at incredible speed. Shards of plastic ripped through his closet door, embedded themselves in the walls, and, tragically, struck him with lethal force. When the authorities arrived, they were greeted by a scene of utter chaos. A destroyed room, a sticky, sweet-smelling mess everywhere, and the tragic remains of a student who had just wanted to make some cheap booze for his friends. He had succeeded in creating a powerful chemical reaction, but the final product wasn't alcohol. It was a lesson in pressure, delivered in the most explosive way possible. 6. The bow hunter who brought a knife to a tank fight is a timeless story about the difference between being a hunter and being food. We're in the vast open plains of Wyoming, a place where the men are men, and the buffalo, well, the buffalo are 2,000-pound furry locomotives with horns. Our hero is a bow hunter, a man who eschews modern rifles for the purity of the hunt. He saw himself as a modern-day frontiersman, a true sportsman matching his wits and skills against the raw power of nature. His target for the day was a magnificent, full-grown bison, a creature that is essentially a living, breathing tank covered in fur. Now, most bow hunters would try to get a shot from a safe distance, maybe 50 or 60 yards away, to give themselves a fighting chance if things go wrong. But our guy, he was feeling bold. He was a purist. He wanted to get close. He stalked the massive beast, creeping through the tall grass until he was just 20 yards away. 20 yards. That's less than the length of a school bus. He was practically close enough to smell what the bison had for breakfast. From this incredibly risky position, he drew his bow, took careful aim, and let his arrow fly. It was a perfect shot. The arrow sailed through the air and struck the bison squarely in its massive flank. Our hunter probably felt a surge of adrenaline and pride. He had done it. He had landed a killing blow on one of North America's largest land animals. But the bison had a different opinion. It didn't fall over. It didn't run away. It just stood there for a second, a look of profound, deep-seated annoyance on its face. The arrow hadn't been a killing blow. It had been a very painful, very irritating poke. And it had just made the 2,000-pound beast extremely, extremely angry. The bison turned its massive head, locked its dark, furious eyes on the source of its irritation, and made a simple decision. It was going to delete the problem. It lowered its head and charged. Now, a 20-yard gap seems like a decent amount of space, but a charging bison can cover that distance in about 2 seconds. Our hunter, who was probably still admiring his shot, looked up just in time to see a wall of fur, muscle, and pure rage bearing down on him at the speed of a freight train. He didn't have time to run. He didn't have time to scream. He just had time to realize that he had made a catastrophic error in judgment. He had brought a bow and arrow to a fight that required an anti-tank missile. The bison demonstrated, with brutal efficiency, why it has remained at the top of the food chain for thousands of years. It had been a beautiful day for a hunt. It just turned out that he wasn't the one doing the hunting. 7. The Beaver Dam and the Explosive Shortcut is a classic tale of man versus nature. A story where a man looked at a complex ecological problem and decided the solution was a very, very big explosion. Our story unfolds on a sprawling farm in Idaho, where a hard-working farmer was facing a persistent furry menace. Beavers. A family of them had built a massive dam on a creek running through his property, and the resulting pond was slowly but surely flooding his valuable pasture land. He tried everything. He tried tearing parts of the dam out by hand, but the beavers, being nature's own tiny, tireless engineers, would just rebuild it overnight. He was frustrated. He was losing a war of attrition against a bunch of oversized rodents. So, he decided it was time to stop thinking like a farmer and start thinking like a demolition expert. He got his hands on a few sticks of dynamite. His plan was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its lack of foresight. He would plant the dynamite in the heart of the beaver dam, light the fuse, and blow the entire structure and hopefully the beavers back to the Stone Age. He waded out into the pond, the murky water swirling around his boots. He found the perfect spot, jammed the dynamite deep into the intricate lattice of mud and sticks, and set the fuse. He lit the match, the tiny flame sputtering in the damp air, and touched it to the fuse. The fuse caught, hissing and sparking like an angry snake. Now the clock was ticking. The sane, logical escape route would have been to retreat back the way he came, through the pond to the safety of the shore he'd just left. But our hero was in a hurry. He saw a shortcut. He could just run across the top of the beaver dam itself to get to the other side of the creek. It was faster. It was more direct. It was, he thought, a brilliant idea. He began to scramble across the top of the dam, a precarious jumble of wet logs, branches, and mud. He was halfway across, the hissing of the fuse getting louder and more urgent behind him, when he stepped on a particularly slick, moss-covered log. His foot shot out from under him. He flailed his arms wildly, trying to regain his balance, but it was useless. He tumbled off the top of the dam and landed with a splash in the shallow water, right next to the very structure he had just armed with high explosives. He lay there, dazed and tangled in the branches, looking at the sputtering, rapidly shortening fuse just a few feet away. In that final moment, he must have realized the beautiful, tragic irony of his situation. He had tried to take a shortcut to safety, and had instead taken a shortcut to the front row seat of his own self-destruction. The resulting explosion was spectacular. It obliterated the Beaver Dam, sent a geyser of water and mud high into the air, and of course solved his beaver problem permanently. 8. The knight who was defeated by his own armor is a story that proves that sometimes historical accuracy can be a real killer. We're at a bustling medieval reenactment fair in England. The air is filled with the smell of roasting turkey legs, the sound of lute music, and the enthusiastic, if not always accurate, shouts of people pretending to live in the 15th century. Our hero is one of these dedicated reenactors, a man who took his hobby very, very seriously. He wasn't just wearing a cheap costume. He was decked out in a full, magnificent suit of authentic plate armor. We're talking the real deal. A heavy steel breastplate, greaves, gauntlets, the whole 9 yards. He looked incredible, a gleaming walking tank of historical authenticity. He was probably having a great day, basking in the admiration of the crowd. But then a dispute arose. Maybe it was an argument over the rules of a joust, or perhaps someone insulted the historical accuracy of his helmet. Whatever the cause, our knight got into a heated argument with another reenactor. Voices were raised. Insults were hurled. Our knight, his face beet red with fury inside his metal helmet, became so enraged, so utterly consumed by medieval anger, that his 21st century body couldn't handle it. He clutched his chest, gasped for air, and collapsed to the ground, the magnificent suit of armor clattering loudly on the grass. He was having a massive heart attack. His fellow reenactors, suddenly snapped out of their historical fantasy, rushed to his side. Someone called for paramedics. The emergency crew arrived quickly, sirens wailing, and immediately went to work. They knew what to do. Get the defibrillator, rip the shirt open, apply the paddles. But they immediately ran into a problem they had never encountered in training. They couldn't get to his chest. He was sealed inside a fortress of polished steel. The intricate system of buckles, straps, and leather ties that held his authentic breastplate in place was a complete mystery to them. They fumbled with the fastenings, trying to figure out the medieval puzzle, as precious seconds ticked away. They didn't have the tools or the time to pry it open. They were helpless, unable to use their life-saving modern technology because of a 500-year-old piece of costume design. The knight lay there, defeated not by a sword or a lance, but by his own unwavering commitment to historical accuracy. 9. The game that ended in a perfect tie is a story that comes to us from Russia, a country known for its harsh winters, its strong vodka, and its unique, if somewhat brutal, forms of entertainment. Our story features two friends who, after a long and very thorough session of communing with a bottle of vodka, found themselves bored. They needed a game, a contest of strength and endurance to prove who was the true champion of the evening. They didn't settle for arm wrestling or a game of cards. Their idea of a friendly competition was a little more percussive. They decided to play a game where they would take turns hitting each other over the head with a heavy metal fire extinguisher. You read that correctly. This wasn't an argument that got out of hand. This was the agreed-upon rule set for their entertainment. One of them, let's call him Dmitri, probably said, "I bet I can take a hit better than you." And his friend Ivan replied, "Nyet, I am the true Ironhead." And thus the first annual fire extinguisher head-bashing championship was born. So they stood facing each other in a dimly lit room, the heavy red fire extinguisher held by Ivan, ready for the first round. Dmitri braced himself, probably puffing out his chest with drunken bravado. Ivan swung the extinguisher in a mighty arc, bringing it down with a sickening metallic thwack on Dmitri's head. Dmitri staggered, saw stars, but remained standing. A true champion. He shook his head, probably trying to get the ringing out of his ears, and then it was his turn. He took the fire extinguisher from Ivan, who now stood ready to receive his punishment. Dmitri, not wanting to be outdone, swung it with even more force, connecting squarely with Ivan's skull. Now they were both bleeding, both concussed, but both still in the game. The score was even. They decided to go for round 2. They repeated the process, another brutal, skull-rattling exchange of blows. They were both still standing, their pride somehow outweighing the immense, screaming pain signals from their brains. They were true warriors, in their own minds. They decided on a third, final, tie-breaking round. Ivan went first, delivering another devastating blow. Dmitri, barely conscious, somehow stayed on his feet. He took the extinguisher for what would be the final time. He summoned all his remaining strength, all his vodka-fueled fury, and delivered the last blow of the game to Ivan's head. And then, in a moment of beautiful, tragic symmetry, both men collapsed to the floor simultaneously, succumbing to their massive, self-inflicted head trauma. The game had ended. The final score was a perfect tie. They had both proven, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that they were equally tough and equally, profoundly, stupid. It's a grim tale, but it has a silver lining. At least neither of them had to buy the other one a drink. 10. The $50 bet that cost him everything is a story that proves, once and for all, that the human mouth was not designed to be a storage unit for sporting equipment. We're in a bar in Florida where a man, fueled by liquid courage and an overwhelming desire to be the center of attention, made a bold and very specific claim. He wasn't going to eat something spicy or drink something gross. He announced to the entire bar that he could swallow a standard, regulation-size pool ball, a solid 2¼ inch sphere of pure, indigestible resin. His friends, and the other bar patrons, immediately called him on it. A pot was quickly collected. $50 for the man who could perform this impossible feat of human anatomy. For our hero, this was his moment to shine. Someone racked the table and he selected his co-star for the evening. Let's say it was the 8-ball, for dramatic effect. He held the smooth, heavy ball in his hand, feeling its weight, probably contemplating the best angle of attack. He worked his jaw, stretching it out like a python preparing to swallow a pig. The bar went quiet, all eyes on him. He took a deep breath, opened his mouth impossibly wide, and, with a series of strained, gagging motions, he began to force the ball down his throat. It was a grotesque, yet mesmerizing spectacle. The ball slowly disappeared, stretching his esophagus to its absolute limit. And then, with one final, mighty gulp, it was down. It had passed the point of no return. He stood there, panting, tears in his eyes but a triumphant look on his face. He had done it. The crowd erupted in a mix of cheers and horrified gasps. He pointed to the $50 pot on the bar, ready to claim his prize. But then he tried to take a breath, and nothing happened. The pool ball, in its new home, had created a perfect airtight seal in his esophagus. It was acting like a flawless spherical cork, completely blocking his windpipe. The triumphant look on his face was instantly replaced by one of pure, silent panic. He clawed at his throat, his eyes wide with the horrifying realization of what he had just done. His friends, their laughter turning to terror, tried the Heimlich maneuver, but it was useless. How do you dislodge a perfectly smooth, heavy sphere that has created a vacuum seal? You can't. He had won the $50 pot. He had become a local legend for a glorious 30 seconds. But in his desperate bid for a few bucks and a moment in the spotlight, he had forfeited all future breathing rights. It was the most expensive $50 he ever made. All right, time to settle the score. You've heard 10 new tales of epic failure. But here's the burning question. What's the one everyday thing you still do, even though deep down you know it's a terrible idea? Like microwaving metal, or texting while walking, or trying to assemble IKEA furniture without the instructions. Confess your sins in the comments below. If these stories made you clutch your pearls, or just your common sense, smash that like button. And subscribe, because as long as bad ideas exist, we'll keep telling their stories.